Jim.
Hey, I can hear
Yeah,
you
very
now.
cool. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks. How about
Good,
you?
good. So, hi, this is John Stoddard, and I've got a special guest today. That's Jim Cantrell. Jim is an entrepreneur, strategist, subject matter expert in satellite systems, space system markets, and a road racer. He's a car enthusiast. He's the co-founder of Vector Launch out of Tucson. He is the founder of Strat Space, founder of Vintage Exotics Competition Engineering, and an early partner and VP at SpaceX. It is a great pleasure to have you here, Jim. How are things going today?
It's great, John. Thanks for having me.
So let's just kind of jump into questions here. How did you get your idea or concept for this business? I'm referring to the Vector launch. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so that really was born out of necessity in a way. It was something that came out of my working with a lot of these commercial startups in space that couldn't get launched. For example, I helped Skybox Imaging get started. We later sold it to Google for $500 million. One of the early things that tripped us up was launch. One of the things I was doing was helping them arrange for those launches, and we found one out of Russia on a Nepper, which is a converted ICBM, and suddenly one day we didn't have a launch anymore after we negotiated and paid for it because the Russian government decided they didn't want to fly those anymore. It was internal politics. It almost tripped the company over and bankrupted it. We quickly turned around and found one out of India. But I said at the time, this is no way to run a railroad. So somebody needs to solve this problem. I'd been waiting, assuming that SpaceX would get back into the small launch business. They never did. I saw Rocket Lab get involved with it. I helped them raise their Series B, and thought that there was probably room enough in the market for 4 or 5 of those kinds of companies. So I set out to buy shall we call it a wounded rocket company, been around for a number of years, and infuse it with new talent and ability to raise money and so forth, and go that way. And that's how Vector started.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know it was a company that was kind of moving along already in establishment, and you purchased it or merged or
Yeah, we
what
purchased
was the
it.
case on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was Garvey Spacecraft, and it was founded by John Garvey, who became one of Vector's co-founders. John and I go back to the early days of SpaceX together. I joined SpaceX. John didn't. John went on to start Garvey, and for 15, 20 years, he, was working a lot of small government programs and so on, and had some technological success, not much business success. And since I knew him for so long, I thought that made a good partner. We looked at a couple others that were in a similar boat. There's a lot of rocket startups that don't make it, and then they don't necessarily die. They just sort of wither away, and this is one of them. So his was the one we decided to go with because it seemed to fit the needs.
Yeah, so you're for a rocket company. This is for a software company in an industry I've been in for 20 plus years. It's pretty easy and not very expensive to launch an MVP. In a rocket space, completely different, I bet.
Totally different. Yeah, it's very capital
Yeah.
intensive business. That was one of the things that forced me. It led me to leave SpaceX early on. Was Elon made the proclamation that he would spend $100 million on this rocket, which was vector sized originally, but then it became very large, and we all knew that it would cost $800 or $900 million to do this. So I thought, well, this guy will never succeed, and it'll be another billionaire's pipe dream, and so on. So that's why I left, and it turned out to be probably the wrong move because I didn't see the shuttle retiring and all that public money that was going into the shuttle. Some of it was available to SpaceX, and so he found some other money besides his $100 million. But between that and about $1 billion that NASA put into it, that enterprise became a success. But you're looking, any rocket company has to raise at least $100 million. There's very few examples otherwise, and up to $500 million to $1 billion. So that kind of capital is serious. It's hard to raise, and so as a result, there's a lot of companies that rise and fall.
Yeah, I read his book on that, and I you can go to his SpaceX page, and his manifesto is filled up with government launches. That's very interesting timing, which is a really big factor in success of companies. Is timing.
Yeah,
And sometimes you
yeah.
just don't have any control over
I'd rather be lucky than good, I like to say. But if you're both, that's
it.
even better. And I think a certain amount of being good ends up being lucky, because if you're not good enough to recognize luck when it happens, sometimes it just passes you by. I've seen a lot of people who have lucky thing after lucky thing just, cross their nose and they don't even know it. And there's a certain sort of talent, I think, in recognizing when you're fortunate and the timing's right.
Yeah, yeah, that is the case when you see these serial entrepreneurs. So
Yeah.
when you purchased or acquired Garvey, did you change the mission? What was the mission from the outset? And then what did you ultimately manufacture? I mean, like we were going to go after this market because we did a lot of research, and this is the one where we're going to go for.
Yeah, we did change things quite a bit. So Garvey was after what he called a nanosat launch vehicle. So he was looking to launch, say, 10 kilograms, that's 20 pounds, into orbit. Being a little bit more versed in the market, I looked at the numbers and I said, well, it's got to be 50 to maybe 200 kilograms in that range. And what we thought made the most sense, and I still am a big believer in this concept, is being able to mass manufacture the vehicles to get the costs down. So really what you have in the rocket space is you have very large reusable rockets like Elon and SpaceX do, and that reusability gets their flight rates up and therefore their costs down. It's more of an argument for reusability there to take the burden off the manufacturing, because they're very large devices, very human intensive, labor intensive manufacturing, and so forth. There's a practical limit as to how many of those you can push out the door. Whereas smaller rockets, we can build them like cars, or as Khrushchev said, like sausages. And there's a totally different economic system that competes there by getting learning curve cost savings. Just because you build so many of them, the amount of labor hours comes down, the parts costs come down, and so forth. So that was really what I brought to the table, was that vision. And it was completely different than what Garvey had. Garvey had the core technology of the engines. And sort of ironically, in the end, this is probably one of the things that became a fracture point in the company, was that it was not completely consistent with some of the founders' early ideas.
Okay. And did he stayed on board, or did he leave, or?
Yeah, no, he's still there. I resigned about a month ago, and
Okay.
this is one of our fracture points, was, what should the company really be? And when troubles came, he advocated going back to small and simple. So, like he was for 15 years. So it's just an ironic outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the experience too. I was with a company. I think it was just way too management heavy, too many chiefs in the kitchen, and there was nothing interesting about the business anymore for me. So
right,
I exited that for the same reason. Yeah. So
yeah, I had to leave because I didn't agree with the decisions the board was making. So it was similar sort of reasoning.
Yeah. So were customers lining up for that, the rockets you were building? Sorry?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we had about $400 million in backlog between written contracts that were signed, and we were getting advance payment on them, and some contracts that had no advance payment, and then some were letters of intent and reservations. Just before we shut down, we got a $5 million Air Force contract, and we had about a $17 million DARPA contract that we were in the middle of putting together. No doubt the demand was there. The market risk, I think, is pretty low for that particular thing. The biggest issue is just execution and capital risk. And as you watch things happen in Washington D.C., I remember watching about this time of last year when I was closing my Series B and the stock market started to melt down. My life turned into hell. So it was a different set of worries that you encountered in such a capital intensive company. And so my entire job was really just raising the money and creating and sustaining the vision. And that was subject to a lot of external influences that were way beyond my control, like politics. And I can only imagine I'm hearing that the capital environment right now is very difficult and it's getting worse, and so people are in the business are starting to say, well, shelter in place for the next 12 months until the election's over, and that's probably quite true. So, it's one of those things that ends up being very, very difficult to do with such a capital-intensive business.
So
market risk is not one of them.
Yeah. Would you say you spent, if you had 100% of your day, how much was spent on raising capital?
About 80%.
Jesus. Yeah.
That was it.
Now
that was the two.
Yeah, that's amazing. I help first time, second time entrepreneurs raise capital for their business, and I tell them to really set your expectations. This is like that Tom Cruise movie where time happens over and over again. He gets killed, and it's the same day over and over again.
Like
hope you didn't make the same mistake again.
Yeah. No, you get a few weeks, months, maybe if you're lucky when you close around, and you get to lick your wounds and go away and get to meet your family again. Say, hey, I used to live here. Can you let me in the house again? And reacquaint yourself, and then you're back at it. And you're on airplanes and in hotels and strange places and meeting people you never thought you'd meet.
What kind of funds were these? Hedge funds, private equity?
Yeah, mostly VCs. So we had a lot of family office money, VCs. We had Sequoia led our Series A, and they're one of the premier VCs, and Lightspeed jumped in, and another VC called Cantrell.
Yeah, once you get a lead investor, it's a little bit easier to get the second one.
Oh yeah. And the Series B was still hard. We got a term sheet from let's just call it a national wealth fund that I'm not going to name. And the term sheet was okay, except when we went to negotiate, they thought that negotiating was insulting. So that fell apart. I had to find a second term sheet, and I did. I found another investor that was willing to lead, and so we put together a $70 million round for the Series B. So, but a lot of that, was New York money. So one of my success points was looking beyond sort of the local fishing pond, which is really Silicon Valley. And I find Silicon Valley mindset to be probably conducive to software, but there's too much, shall I call it, intellectual conformity there for my liking. And, when it didn't look like software, they didn't want to hear it. There were a few that were brave that would hear it. But by and large, if you didn't look like and act like everybody else around there, then you weren't going to get money. So I fished in New York, and I fished in Boston, and I went and looked for money elsewhere, Europe, and it was very successful at that. And I found, a thirst for particularly space investments in some communities that nobody else was fishing in. So that was one of the secrets to my success.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you know who Jason Kalkanis is?
No.
Yeah, he's an angel investor in Silicon Valley. He's done over 150 investments in Silicon Valley. And he said even if you've got a great software package, if you're from outside Silicon Valley, they'll place a lower valuation on your business.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's sort of a regional bigotry, but I guess I understand why they do it, because they feel like they can reach out and touch people. That's a little more classic. In the old days, they'd like to drive by and see if your lights were still on after 8 o'clock. It's a lot different now. And you see places like Mitchell Capital and Peter Thiel's group, and I'm quite friendly with them. I've done work for them over the years. They moved to Austin because of this intellectual conformity business, and they found that the creativity of the business plans were just diminishing. So I think it's going to run its course, this kind of thing in venture capital. And I'm already starting to see this. I was with some friends of mine in Germany last week, and their newly minted VCs started their own funds, and they're talking, about reaching out beyond Silicon Valley to get new ideas, talking about funding hardware, not just software, and so forth. So you'll see this change, but it's not going to change overnight.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a mixture of software and hardware that you're going to start seeing.
It's cyclical. Yeah, it's cyclical, because once your software, makes certain strides, your hardware has to keep up with it. And what people are starting to find, like this electric motor craze for cars and scooters and everything else, it's got a logical end to it. People don't realize to replace every vehicle on Earth with battery powered something. There's not enough lithium in the crust, in the mantle of the Earth to make those batteries. Furthermore, where does that electricity come from? Do you realize that electricity doesn't come out of the air? It actually has to be generated, and that's generally fossil fuels if it's not nuclear. So, Arizona here, we're one of the few really advanced states in power generation. Look, we've got nuclear, we've got solar. I've got solar in my house, and we have wind and hydro generation. So the rest of the country has to buy it from Wyoming, where they still do it, out of fossil fuels, and import it. California, I'm speaking about. So there's a physical sort of part of the technology that's really been neglected from the investment perspective that I see as one of the next big pushes in an investment frontier.
Yeah, and I think that with a guy that understands capital-intensive businesses and funding those types of businesses, I think you'd be on the forefront of that.
I've had 3 phone conversations with people that have new engines that they'd like to find some money for this morning. So they're finding me.
This is interesting because did you watch that latest Netflix episode on Bill Gates' brain?
I haven't, but it's on my list of things. I've downloaded it.
Yeah. Anyway, he created a business and took a look at nuclear power plants because every other nuclear power plant today around the world is built with slide rules. And he said, we're building something based on AI technology and the latest advances. I mean, he's got Nathan Siminoff, and a couple other, a guy that owns 1,400 patents, more than Edison, building it, and how it's cooled, what it can stand, tsunami, hurricane, you name it.
Right.
But it got put on hold due to the trade wars going on with China.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of victims of that and a lot of things that are going to be better from it. And it's just one of those forces of nature that come along. But yeah, nuclear power has been, in my opinion, been way underrated, overscared and so forth. And there's a lot of very viable technologies there. And, the Fukushima reactor is old technology. The Chernobyl reactor was very old technology. That was a carbon reactor. And, all these things are legacies from World War II, basically. And there's room for new technology and technological improvements. Thorium reactors have a lot of promise and so forth. I think there's going to be a renaissance in this kind of investing. I really believe that because we've got to solve the energy problem. And nuclear is a great way to solve it. I mean, I don't care what side of the climate argument you're on, nuclear doesn't produce CO2. And
it doesn't produce CO2. Yeah. And Bill Gates' nuclear reactor claimed that it could take all of that nuclear waste, and use that as fuel. Probably
so. Yeah, we had breeder reactors. We were using them to create nuclear weapons, but that principle's been around for a while. So yeah, if you can solve the waste problem at a nuclear reactor, even if you can't, you're still net better, I think, than what we're using fossil fuels for. We should be using fossil fuels for making plastic, not burning it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think it's a widely accepted opinion. So let's kind of go back to the Vector launch and just talk about, you've had some time away from the business. What do you think your biggest mistake was? And how do you see it as a failure or just another step in your life on an adventure?
Well, honestly, you can't know if something's a failure till you look back, decades later. I'm not a particularly religious person, but my mother used to tell me that everything happens for a reason, and you don't see that until later. So I do have a certain sense of fate that I carry with me. So I don't consider it a failure. Obviously, the business didn't live up to the financial expectations we had. We did make a lot of progress, and I think it showed that with the right team, you can actually do this fairly quickly. The mistakes that we made, and me as CEO, I have to carry the weight of those mistakes. I think I really chose poorly on my founding team. I had to get rid of one early on because he was not performing, and then when I ended up with troubles on performance of my other founders, I had trouble actually getting them to perform or removing them. And if you look at what Elon's done, and this dawned on me finally, after all these years of being away from him, that one of the reasons he was successful in this particular business is he was able to actually get people out of the way that weren't contributing. Where you're in a capital intensive business, I would count how much money we were burning every day, and it was an astounding amount. And we were burning $3 and $4 million a month, so you can calculate that out. And one day's delay is an extraordinarily expensive thing. So the ability to get people to do the right thing, to know what the right things are to do, was at the top of the importance. And Elon, he controlled the board, he controlled everything. So we spent more time towards the end fighting about why things weren't working than just fixing them. And I have to say that the team dynamics and the team chemistry was good in certain senses, but with the founders in particular, I think I just chose poorly. That's how I see it now. And
I think I see what you're trying to get at. I mean, it's not like you're making coffee at Starbucks. I mean, it's more like if you were in World War II and the cost of losing life per day, you had to innovate as fast as possible to end the war as quickly as possible.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a different environment than a sort of a collegial, let's discuss it and think about it. And, I was accused of being General Patton in my management style, and I was, right? And that created a lot of cracks. But, there was a certain part of the team that was all behind that. And, so we became tribal. We became two different tribes. We had the academic tribe, and then we had the military tribe that wanted to just get it done. And at the end of the day, they were irreconcilable.
Well, the academic tribe will get tenure. Just keep running it out.
And they're still there.
Yeah. Was there anything you could have put into place as far as your equity, your shareholders, your control over it, anything that you could have put in place to have more Elon-type control over that?
Yeah, I could have formed this differently. The whole thing was my idea in the first place, and what I should have done was been a little less magnanimous. People told me when I was forming this that I was too generous in splitting the equity among the founders equally. I've always believed that, and I still believe that. But I think looking backwards, there's a certain sort of benevolent dictator that has to come about at some point. And again, using the Elon example, I think that's why he's been successful. And trust me, I didn't like him either, right? And I wasn't searching to be liked. I'm driven by sort of a fundamental sense of fairness and truth and justice. And so that's what drove me to that. And I think that was, shall we say, naive. And I should have just formed the company and then doled out the equity on a smaller basis and maintained the control. Because by the end, it was of the founders, if you got the other founders on your side, then I couldn't control the board. I did an amazing job of keeping the investor control of the board to a minimum. It was the founder control of the board that ended up being the problem, not where I expected it.
So are they any closer to the ultimate mission, is launching and reusing it?
Not clear. I don't hear anything. Yeah. I don't hear anything from them. I know they're still shut down. I know they're looking for money. It's going to be a very tough year for raising money. They got rid of the guy by essentially forcing me out, who was able to raise the money. Nobody else in the company could. John certainly couldn't. He would have over 15 years. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure where they go from here. So I'm going to let that settle and see.
Yeah, that is a skill that people don't understand is different than actually building and running a company, is raising money.
Totally different, yeah. Well, and it's hard to do that and run the company, I can tell you. So you have to get a number two that you trust. And it's a little too late. You talk about mistakes. I got a good number two. She came in from Blue Origin, CFO. She was doing a great job, but it was just too late. And we couldn't get somebody that could ride herd on the rest of these guys fast enough. And so raising money. You go back to that is you spend all your time on that. You can't be making sure the trains run on time. It's just a separate job.
Yeah. How much did you ultimately raise for Sector launch?
We were about $103 million, 104, something like that.
Yeah. Well, anything you could say, sit around with your wife, goes, here's what I learned from that, what I won't do again, how I'm a different person from this.
Oh yeah, I'm a completely different person. Here's the frustrating part. I am much, much smarter after 4 years of this, in, both internal strength and then what I know and know not to do and what I know to do. So the temptation to do it again is there. But I think there's a certain amount of patience you have to let, situations settle out to figure out where to go with it. But, yeah, I'm ambitious, and I'm probably more ambitious than I need to be. I certainly don't need the money. I was doing it more out of a motivation of mission, that it needed to be done, that it's good for the national security of the United States. And this came along as I was doing the business. The amount of prosperity that we were creating for so many people just really warmed my heart, I have to say. And I see people coming from all walks of life that would come in and discover themselves in this business. And the potential there was for everybody to be millionaires when we had exits, and it was transformative to people's lives. And that became my second mission in the company was that. So I was very dedicated to the employees we had there and to their success. So it was just really sad to me when it all fell apart suddenly, and with sort of a lot of really bad sequence of events that couldn't have been more poorly timed. Had Sequoia pulled out 3 or 4 days later, we would have survived it, but we got caught between that and some federal laws. So I think the next time I do something like this, it's going to be with a lot more caution as far as the growth rate, because we were trying to go so fast and to do it to get to market so quickly. We took a lot of risks, and I think that we probably took too many risks in terms of where we stretched ourselves, and was always good at finding the next rabbit to pull it out of the hat. But boy, we got caught. It's a little bit like driving in a race car, and somebody spins in front of you and you run into them and it's over. That's basically what happened.
Nothing you can do. I mean, it's 30-40% of those cars are running in a race, like mechanical. Somebody throws a wrench or tire in front of you.
Right. Yeah, it's not like we forgot to tighten the lug nuts.
So on that Sequoia round, was it tranched out on a original commitment, or was it going back for more that they said?
So they came in. Yeah, it was more support. They came in the Series B Series A led it. They came in on Series B. They were intending on coming in on the Series C. That's what they were telling us. And suddenly, like over the space of a weekend, literally had a reverse 180-degree reversal of support. And I know what they told us. We don't really know why that happened. But the sense I got from the discussion was that their partnership was no longer supportive of investments in space. And I think along with what you and I were talking about, they smelled a lot of turmoil coming in the capital markets. We've been talking about that for years. And just the founder drama, that's never good. So Sequoia asked our guy who was supportive, and when he came in the first time, he told me, "Hey, we're with you to the death on this." They told him to resign from the board, and he did, and that caused a material change in our circumstances, and it collapsed our bridge financing. We had quite a bit of money in the bank, enough for 4 or 5 months, and we're raising more. In fact, we had like $3 million in wire transfers that were supposed to come in that day. That Sequoia told us that he's resigning from the board. Total shock, and so we had to stop accepting those wires immediately, and we did, and it stopped that amount of revenue coming in, and then our debt that was part of the bridge financing was contingent on Sequoia's support. So we knew that would get pulled, and that would put us below the 60-day threshold of cash in the bank, just barely. That would make us all felons in the eyes of the federal government by virtue of the WARN Act. So it was, like I say, it was just a perfect storm of those things. It's like a car crash. This led to this, led to that. End of the day, the car crashed, and there we were. So then the finger pointing started. Within the space of about 4 days, we had to figure out, to shut the company down, because of the Warren Act primarily. We didn't know when the banks would pull the money, so it turned out we had probably another week past that. But that was the dynamic of the situation, and I think we made all the right decisions. Once we got that call from Sequoia, I wasn't there after the Friday when we let everybody go, but can't speak to the rest of the board. I did bring in some offers to refinance the company, and the board didn't even want to take it to shareholders, so that was my bigger disagreement.
Yeah, you could tell that your heart's still in it. They're just not into you.
Well, I believe in the mission, and I think this idea of mass manufactured rockets will revolutionize space transportation. And at the end of the day, I'm a transportation guy, and rockets are a part of that. So, yeah, I still am a big believer in this, and I will just say this, that so many investors, I personally committed to them that we were going to do our best, and I just feel sort of that same sense of duty and honor to them to make this happen. So that's what you're hearing.
Yeah, I when I talk to entrepreneurs, when you are talking to an investor, you're pitching your idea. You're saying, look, if I give you $1, can you turn it into $4, $5, $10, and
Right.
keep me updated on how that progress is going? And you're just going to do your best.
Well, they know the risks. They're professionals, and they're qualified investors and all that. But still, this is people's money, and you make that solemn oath to them that you're going to do your utter best, right? And because I take that seriously, I take the failure seriously.
Yeah. Well, what's next for Jim? Where are you headed now? That chapter's closed, let's say, and what's next?
Well, my wife is retired. She spent most of her life in Hughes Missile Systems, later Raytheon, and ended up retired a few years ago. So I'm enjoying that with her right now. So I'm telling people I'm retired. I don't know how long that's going to last. I still have a couple businesses that I run. Vintage Exotics, has been around for almost 20 years now, and got a couple guys there. So I'm spending a lot of time with them and seeing my grandchildren, which I haven't seen for a while. I'm visiting old friends, and I'm an investor in a number of other space companies, including one called ISI over in Finland. Been working with them. So my guess is I won't stay out of the ring for very long, but probably I told myself at least until January I'm not going to do anything serious. I think we've got to watch the capital storm that's coming over the next 12 months, and that'll guide a lot of what I end up doing.
Right. We got to see where that goes. So I want to, I want to really appreciate the time you've taken to answer these questions. When I take my kid who is in Cub Scouts, he was a couple years ago Cub Scouts, and we go out to the east side of Tucson and watch the rocket shooting. And the Raytheon engineers there put these 10-foot rockets in. It still gets tingles down my back. And this is
cool.
Just an exciting venture that
it is.
You embarked on. And I appreciate you sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you. And just for your listeners, I am actually finishing up my book, which is called Breaking All the Rules. The inside story of the new space race, and I trace it back to stuff I did in the beginning of my career, where we did citizen-funded space, and I worked for the French Space Agency using donations through the Planetary Society. So that should be coming out early next year.
Awesome! I will be happy to get that in front of my audience.
All right, appreciate it.
All right, Jim. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure.